going to start doing this thing now where there's this delay with Zoom and I keep going, and we are live. Whilst I wait for Zoom to kick in. This Zoom loading bar's lying to me. Here we go. Let's go.
UX.
So we're back again.
We are. It's good to be here.
Oh, after when did we last speak? 2 weeks ago or something?
Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Probably 2.
And this time, I had so much fun talking last time, and we both wanted to chat again. And this time, we're going to talk nothing about design, nothing about branding, although it might end up coming up. But you suggested productivity, discipline, and self-promotion. And I want to start this by your tweet, because I think it's a good place to start.
All right.
I'm going to quote you. This is what you said. I'm a reformed slacker and chronic underachiever. I want to know what you meant by that to start with.
Wow. Well, I meant what I said. I mean, for all of my life, I've been kind of, dialing it in. I feel like I've never really truly applied myself at anything. And I've been able to, as I think most kind of, if you're somewhat talented at anything in life, you can kind of get away with a lot more than you might have if you didn't have those gifts. And that's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? And for me, I think it's been very much been a curse for most of my life, where I've been able to get away with things, and so I've just kept kept kind of cheating, I suppose. I mean, cheating at life, right? And it got to a point this year where I really felt fed up with myself, just kind of pulling these like 4-hour work days most of the time and doing, I think, really solid work for clients, but not really anything beyond that. I never really, devoted enough time to business development or to self-improvement or to any of these things. Instead, I would, do a few hours of work. I would, roll out of bed at maybe 10, 11, 12 in the morning, and it
sounds
just
amazing,
got to,
man. This sounds amazing.
You think? Well, it is amazing, but after a certain point, and when you kind of take stock of where you're at in life and where you could be if you really had been applying yourself, I think you just get really fed up with yourself. And for a brief moment, I felt kind of this deep like self-hatred, like, wow, I'm really a piece of shit, and I have to stop being such a piece of shit. And so, yeah, for the past month and a half, 2 months, I feel like I've actually put in an honest effort, and I think it shows in my work and in the results that I've been getting. But it's interesting, and I know that you're kind of coming at this from the complete opposite side of things, right? You've always been very productive and very much like a hard worker, and so I'm very excited to do this conversation and to have this conversation with you, because I think we can, I don't know, hopefully hopefully deliver some value to people and have some interesting insights, maybe.
Solve what productivity actually is, maybe.
Yeah, that's a tough question.
I have this conversation a lot with people, because naturally the first thing that people usually say to me is, oh my God, you do so many things and blah, blah, blah. And how do you get it all done? And, you're a beast, those kind of words. And I'm like, it's tough for me to break out of that and see myself outside of it, because it's the only thing I've known for so long. My parents were always hard workers, and it's reflected on me that their work ethic, and it's kind of, it's never felt like work. I've never felt like I'm working too hard. Believe me, people tell me nearly constantly that I work too hard. People are always telling me that. And it's never felt like I am working too hard to me. It's always been doing stuff that I enjoy doing. I've always seen them as side projects, or I've just got obsessed with something and I've wanted to do it over and over. Or I've done a side project every day for 365 days. And my girlfriend's always saying, you make yourself busy. It's not that you are busy, you make yourself busy. And I'm always like, well, yeah, you know, that's the point. I make myself busy on purpose. So in terms of productivity, I think I always feel that they're two different things. I do a lot of things, but whether I am productive with them or not is kind of a different thing. And for the longest time, I don't think I was productive. The fact that I was doing all these things, excuse me, I don't think I was productive. I was doing a lot of things, starting a lot of things, never really finishing the things, and never really having an output to show for the work that I've done. So for the longest time, I didn't feel productive. And really for the longest time as well, I felt like I have to work in an office 8 hours a day. I have to work 9 while 5 days a week, and all those kind of things. So I think to some extent, the way that the things that you're talking about, yeah, I think we can only get 4 hours of decent work done in a day. Solid, focused, creative work. And then sometimes there's days that go by where before I know it, I've got home at 5 p.m. or whatever, and then I've got obsessed by another project and I'm working on that for 3 hours, and then suddenly I've done 3 or 4 more hours on another project, and then I've got this kind of thing, the podcast and stuff, which is another hour or 2, but they're not work. You know what I mean? I've just got all these things going on, but then I don't see them as work. They're just parts of my life. It's just the same as me going to a restaurant in an evening. I wouldn't class going to a restaurant, although I can't now. I wouldn't class going to a restaurant for 2 hours as work. Do you know what I mean? It's just another thing that I do.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at things. I think.
Where do you separate those two things? What is work and what is a hobby, and what is...
Yeah, exactly. That's the hard part, right? Especially when you run your own business. And
yeah,
really, I think in this kind of culture that we live in, everything is considered, or it's turned into work, right? Hobbies frequently turned into some kind of work. You turn a hobby into side hustle, and then the side hustle becomes like the main thing that you do. And I think that there isn't this kind of strict compartmentalization any longer. And I don't know if that's contributing to burnout or people feeling like they do more work than maybe they actually do. It's interesting. So you've been able to kind of increase your efficiency and your productivity really by, I guess, playing, tricking your own brain into thinking that, oh, well, this is something entirely different, and so now I have all of this new energy, right? Is that kind of how you do it?
I guess so. So a typical day might be I'll get up at 9 a.m. I'll get up at 8 or 9 a.m. I'm not an early waker. I'm not an early riser. I never have been. I get up at 9 a.m. I go to work. So we've got an office. We've got a studio at Genius Division. I go to Genius Division. I tend to stay there till 5 or 6 p.m. And then I go home, and then I'll get something to eat, or something to eat, or I'll usually work out at that time, or lift weights or go for a walk or go for a run or whatever. And then 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., I'll usually start working on something else again. And that thing that I work on then at the minute is produce more. So making the images on Twitter and Instagram, and sometimes the podcast stuff as well, or basically a kind of a fun thing. And I think where the energy comes from is because I want to do it. It's a fun thing. Some people might sit down on an evening and watch Netflix, and that's not the thing that I do. Instead of watching TV, I go sit back at my computer and do something else and work on something that I find fun or interesting or that develops my skills. And there's been various times through my career over 15 years where I've done nothing on an evening, where I have come home from the studio and just sat there and watched TV, or sat there and, I played a video game or something like that. There is times when I've done that, but every time I've done that over an extended period of time, I felt a little bit like what you felt like. I started to feel like I'm not advancing. And this is a personal thing for me. I've always had this feeling that I should be advancing. I should be getting better at something. Forever, for as long as I can remember, I've always thought that I should be getting better. And that's probably something I should speak to a therapist about. But I've always felt like that. So I should always be advancing something and always improving something and always working on getting better at something, because I don't know where it comes from. I've just always felt like that. So whenever I feel like I'm not progressing on something, if I can look back at myself from a year ago and feel like, well, nothing's really changed. If I do that, I feel like what you felt like. I feel like, well, what have I been doing for a year? I've done nothing. Everything I've done in between has not advanced me in any kind of way. So it all started for me 12 or 13 years ago by doing a design project where I made an A4 poster every day for 365 days. And I think that's where the idea came from, where I developed the discipline to be able to turn it on when I needed it, because there was times when it was quarter to midnight and I still had to do a poster for the day, and I was determined not to lose because I was working against my boss, and I didn't want to not do one. So I just got the laptop out, sat down at quarter to midnight and did it. So for all that time, because I've done so many of these challenges, it kind of develops a base level of discipline in me that anything I want to do, I can do it if I put my mind to it. The idea to me that I can't be bothered to do it, even though I still feel like that for some things, it's not even a problem. If I can't be bothered, I just go, right, just go get it done. It doesn't matter. Just do it. And I've been like that forever since I did those. So I think really those challenges and those daily challenges that I did have kind of turned me into that kind of person where I can turn discipline on if I need it.
Right. Do you ever just get the temptation to watch a Netflix show or to kick back and play some video games? Does that happen still, or has that part of your brain just completely died and wilted away?
No, not at all. I'm not a robot. It just
looks that way.
Yeah, I still play video games. I still love playing video games. It's one of the things I enjoy doing over watching Netflix. I still watch Netflix. I watch maybe an hour of it every couple of days or something like that. I'm not a big TV watcher. I like watching movies. I like going to the cinema and watching movies, but again, I can't do that at the minute.
Right.
So I don't do any of that really. The only thing I do is play video games, and I only do them really on a Sunday, maybe on a Saturday sometimes. I tend to not do any work on a weekend. For a while, I have had that rule, maybe a couple of years, where if I can help it, I don't do anything on a weekend. I'll still do I'll still do the images or something like that, but generally I won't do much work on a weekend. So I tend to fill up my entire week with Zoom calls or doing podcasts or doing the images or whatever. During the week, it's all fair game. I'll work from 9 till midnight if I'm passionate about something. But no, not work. Again, it's not work. It's even I'm conditioned to call it work when it just doesn't feel like work to me. It's just another thing that I do.
Interesting, yeah.
I still do everything that everybody else does. It's just I choose when I want to do it. Some days I can't be bothered with anything. I'll get a pizza, I'll watch Netflix, or I'll watch a film, or I'll play a video game, and I won't do any work. It's just that I think the level of the output that I put out and Hype Fury helps with this, that I can schedule things. It looks like I'm doing more things than I am, or maybe I am doing more things than most people. I don't know. But to me, it isn't as high of a level. In some, when lockdown first hit, I was making a YouTube video every single day. I was editing the video every single day. I was publishing it every day. I was making a podcast every day. I was doing the images every day. I was doing way more than I'm doing now. So I guess my level is somewhere really high up, through the ceiling. And most people see the things that I'm doing now as still being quite a high level. But to me, it isn't. I guess I've got a higher work pain threshold, or whatever you want to call it.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. See, for me, the inclination to just be lazy has always been stronger for me than, the inclination to actually do work. And it wasn't until I think what really triggered it was I recently bought a condo, and up until this point I've just been renting an apartment here. And that really went, once I signed the contract, that really scared the shit out of me. Like I thought about, okay, well, so now I'm indebted to the bank and I need to make a certain amount of money every single month and every single year. Otherwise, this could end really poorly for me. And, I don't think I'd ever end up like out on the street or anything, but I just don't want to be like that guy that lost his house because he couldn't make the mortgage payments.
Yeah.
And at that point, I guess things kind of became realer in a sense, where I started thinking about, wow, well, what am I doing right now that's going to guarantee that I can put food on the table and that I can make my mortgage payments a year from now, right? And the honest answer was, well, not really that much. I mean, I'm doing stuff to pay rent right now, but it's not, I'm not setting myself up for massive success further down the road. And so that was a big wake up call for me. And then I was taking a stroll through town here, and I noticed that there were a few more like vacancies, businesses that had closed down, and the landlords were looking to fill office space. And I thought to myself, wow, like if I had, $1 million in the bank or something like that, there are so many opportunities right now with this downturn. And that might be a little, predatory or cynical or something like that. But I thought to myself, wow, I could actually, I could start a business, or I could buy a business that's kind of down on their luck currently. And through my skills in marketing and my skills in design, I think I could really, make something out of it. But I don't have that amount of cash just lying around. But Then I thought, well, I dropped out of college in order to start this business, and that has, that has meant that I'm way ahead of most of my peers. Like most of the people that I went to high school with, they're still in university, right? And they're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I'm debt free up until recently with this mortgage. Um, but I'm way ahead of them. And then I thought, well, what if I had dropped out of high school instead? And I thought, well, did I really learn that many important things in high school? Not really, right? And my pace of learning, my rate of learning rapidly accelerated once I kind of got out of these educational institutions. And so I think that, had I dropped out of high school, maybe I would be a millionaire by now. And, of course, you could draw that to its logical conclusion of just skipping school altogether. But point being, I feel like and I genuinely feel this way, I feel like I've lost out on so much time spending those years in high school and in all these different institutions.
Yeah.
And I just need to make up for it, right? And if I can, work at twice the capacity that I have been working at, then I'm effectively, if something would have taken me 2 years to get to a certain point, I'll get there in 1 year instead, right? And more realistically, I've only been putting in maybe, 20% of my actual capacity at work. And so if that's 5 times the capacity if I'm operating at 100%, but it's a respectable 3 times or 4 times the capacity, even if I'm not, giving it my honest all.
Mhm.
And that's, that means that I can get to where I would have been in 4 years from now in just 1 year. And that's a very kind of exhilarating prospect and an idea that, wow, I can, instead of, being like 28 years old when I have these things and I have like a family and a big house and a nice car, blah, blah, blah. I could potentially have that in 1 year or 2 years from now when I'm 25 or 26. And that makes a big difference, especially in the long run, right? It's kind of like the compounding interest of time there.
Mm. So you kind of did a time cost calculation and thought, well, if I work twice as hard, I can get things twice as quick. Is that basically the way that you're coming at it from?
Yeah, exactly. Because really, like, making a ton of money has, I mean, of course it's an attractive idea, right? But it's never really truly motivated me that much. I think, as long as I'm making a decent amount of money, that's fine. But I think thinking of it in terms of time and opportunity cost, that, time is something that you will never get back.
Mm.
And do you really want to waste it just kind of, sleeping a lot or watching Netflix or playing video games or doing all of these things that aren't really getting you to where you want to be? That's kind of a terrifying prospect to me.
I think it's a balance in all of
Yeah.
this, and it is a really, really hard balance to get. And I'm saying that from a person who's burnt out twice. I
Mm.
had to continue running my life in the same way. I didn't get to burn out and, go take 6 months off and relearn everything that I already learned. I burned out twice and had to continue doing everything I already did.
Mm.
So there is downsides to working too much, and we'll put the label work on it because it's the thing that people understand the most. So there is downsides to doing too much work, but I know now, after doing it twice, why it happened to me twice. And in terms of burnout for me, what that meant is that I was massively demotivated. I didn't want to do what I wanted to do anymore. I questioned about being a designer. I questioned running an agency. I thought I was rubbish at it. And all these feelings of anxiety come up from suffering from burnout. And then to sit on top of that, the first time I had burnout, I started suffering from panic attacks and really bad anxiety and all kinds of stuff. So it really messed me up the first time I suffered from anxiety, from burnout. And all of that came from, for me, for spending too much time doing the wrong things. So the only thing I know is working hard at something. It's literally the only thing I know. The only thing I know is to hit something over and over and over and over and over and over until it turns into something useful. That's the only trick I have. So whenever anything is presented to me, anything I want to learn, anything I want to get good at, anything I want to turn into something good, I just work at it beyond what anybody else would do. So if you're doing that over and over and over, and you're spending your time in the wrong way, so you're doing it towards something that isn't going to affect your life in a positive manner, or by spending so much time doing that, it means that you're worrying about something else a lot of the time. It leads to burnout, and I think a lot of people wouldn't agree with me, but having suffered from burnout twice, I'm now convinced that burnout isn't a cause of working too hard. It isn't a cause of spending too much time at a computer. It's a cause of spending too much time doing the wrong things over and over and mentally not addressing the fact that you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So you turn up every day and spend 18 hours doing something that you hate. That kind of thing leads to burnout. So the whole hard work thing, I think, is really tough, because I think when you do start to get obsessed with working a lot, and I've been there way worse than I am now, way worse, working 7 days a week, working weekends, never watching TV, never doing anything, just working too much, not exercising. That was the worst level I got to, being massively overweight, all of those things. That isn't good. There's no level of that that's good. But I think there's a balance to find somewhere between it but I think to find the balance, you've got to go through the bad side. And that is the problem. We get told by so many people that working too hard is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Period. That's what people say to you. And if they see that you are working past 5 p.m. on a night, they tell you, Craig, you need to go home. Or, if you're working on a weekend, they say, what are you doing? Why are you working on a weekend? If it's close to midnight or whatever, why are you still sat at your laptop? I get these things all the time. But when you're working towards the right thing and you're doing it for the right reasons, and if you are enjoying it, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And that's why the hard work thing bugs me a little bit, because if you were to double your workload, if you were to say, right, if I do 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, instead of 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, it doesn't directly translate, in my experience, to double the amount of money or double the amount of productivity, because there's a lot of other things to think about. You get tired of working on a project, you might be mentally tired of it. And if you are spending those 12 hours doing the wrong thing, it leads to much worse things. So the whole hard work thing is such a difficult area to navigate. And the only way to get around it, I think, is to figure out what the right level is for you. I do actually think the level of work that somebody can put in, it can be trained. And I think I've probably proved that to somewhat, that your work threshold can be trained. But I do think it's very individual. If you look at somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk, he works like 13, 14 hours a day, every single day. And that's not a lie. And the effort he puts in his business proves the results that you can get from that. But he's an anomaly, and most people can't do that. And then when you look at me, the kind of level of quote unquote hard work that I put in, it isn't a level that most people can achieve, for the same reasons. I'm just an anomaly. So you've got to take it very careful, I think, and take it one step at a time and understand where your level of work is. I think for creative work on one project, 4 hours a day, for me, I think that's plenty enough. I never get to spend pretty much 4 hours a day on a project. But I think that the problem comes with most people, like I said, is where if they're spending 12 hours a day on lots of individual stuff where they never feel like they get anything done, and then you leave the office or you leave your studio and you think, I've spent 12 hours and I've not got anything done. So that was a long rambling answer.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting you brought up burnout, and that's something that's always kind of made me wonder, and it's perplexed me, to be perfectly honest, because I'm by nature skeptical of a lot of these kind of modern illnesses that a lot of people have, or they say they have. And I don't doubt that the symptoms are real, but oftentimes I feel like the causes are kind of misidentified. And it sounds like you agree that hard work in and of itself is not really the problem. The problem comes with when your priorities are kind of out of whack, and you're focusing on the wrong things in life, right? And when you do that very intensely, I can only imagine that at some point you kind of reach this inflection point where you begin to wonder, like, why am I doing this, and what is it good for? And at that point, if you don't have a very good answer, you're going to be depressed, because that's like a very big kind of, cognitive dissonance to deal with, knowing that you have spent X amount of hours, X amount of years doing something, and it really doesn't have like a greater purpose, right? It doesn't lead to anything substantial or important in your life. But and obviously I've never I've never even been close to burnout.
But
I'm not speaking.
Burnout can happen at the level of work that you're talking about if you're doing the wrong things.
Well, then is it really fair to call it burnout? Isn't it just a depression or kind of an existential crisis?
Maybe.
Because burnout, to me, that sounds like, wow, you've been working so hard, you've been going so hard at this thing, and you burned out, right? It all fizzled out, and there's no more there's no more fuel left because you used it all up.
I think the best analogy for it is that if you imagine you've got a big stick and you want to use it as a lever, and you've got a big stick and you've got a big weight on the other side of the room, and the weight is too big for you to lift. And you can never just walk over to it and pick it up. So you've got a gigantic wooden stick, and you put the wooden stick underneath it. And there's kind of two ways to approach that. You either spend an amazing amount of effort to keep pushing the stick underneath it over and over in as quick amount of time as possible. And if you're using the wrong stick at that point, eventually the stick's going to snap. Yeah. But if you've chosen the right stick to move the weight, eventually you will move it. The result is, you still want to move the weight, but you might be using the wrong stick. So I often think the hard work thing as part of it, you need to put in hard work to achieve anything. There's no way around that. And it's the thing. It's the thing that people like to say isn't necessary, but it is. Hard work is necessary for anything. But if you put in the hard work in the wrong place, using the wrong stick, eventually it snaps. So I don't think the hard work is the problem. I think, and I've heard it talked about before, where you don't, basically it's mental health care. If you don't address the things that are going on in your head, so if you're worried about something and you just stick it to the back of your mind and you don't address it, and that's what happened to me a lot. I was worried about something, I stuck it to the back of my mind and carried on working, And eventually that builds up to a point where the stick snaps, and you have to deal with the situation, but it's 10 times, 100 times worse than if you would have just dealt with the initial thing that popped up. So that kind of thing compounds over time. If you are spending 12 hours a day on something and there's a little bit of a worry in the back of your mind, that worry compounds over 12 months to be some kind of big thing that you've got to deal with at the end of it. And the mind works in mysterious ways, and trying to unpick a year of worry after you've been worrying about something. And for me, in the first case of burnout, it was worry over years, not just 1 year. Trying to unpick that is impossible to understand, because the mind works in really mysterious ways. So it's tough to unpick. I do believe burnout's real, and it's a common thing in the creative industries. Designers suffer from it a lot. And it is this thing of separation of work. We struggle. Well, maybe not you, but most designers struggle to separate the life of being a designer from themselves. Design is them. It's all encompassing. Yeah. Everything about them is design. You are thinking about design all of your life, everywhere you go. You never escape from it. That leads to burnout, because you never address it, and you're almost always worrying about design, which over time hits you pretty hard.
It's interesting. This is where my kind of annoying contrarian personality kicks in, which has gotten me into trouble more than a few times. But to me, it seems to me that burnout is something that afflicts mostly, like you said, like the creative industries and people that have kind of cushy office jobs, right? Let's be honest. And I just think about my grandfather and all of his brothers. You know, my grandfather, he had a lot of different jobs. He was a ditch digger. He worked in the forest. You know, he was a farmhand. He worked as kind of the foreman of this big estate. And especially, you know, I think throughout his life, but especially in his 20s and 30s and 40s, I mean, he would work, 12-hour days, digging ditches and doing real, back-breaking work, quite literally back-breaking work, right? And I don't know that he or anyone of his siblings or anyone that I have ever spoken to from that generation ever suffered from burnout or even described anything resembling burnout, right? And so I have this sneaking suspicion, and maybe I'm completely wrong here and kind of way out of my depth, but I have the sneaking suspicion that what is called burnout is really just, I mean, it's a form of depression, right? And depression afflicts people that don't, never do a day's work in their whole lives too, right? And you would never, at that point, you would say that, well, maybe it's because you're not working that you're depressed. But I suspect that it is caused by, this cognitive dissonance, knowing in the back of your head that fundamentally what you're doing doesn't really matter, and your life is fundamentally without purpose, which I think is something that is increasingly common and has been very common for decades, where 100 years ago or even just 60 years ago, there was this very concrete purpose to work, for example, which was, you need to support your family, right? And I think to a lesser extent now, it's still true to some extent, but I think less so now, where we are much more concerned about self-fulfillment and all of these kind of needs that are further up in the Maslowian hierarchy, right? And I wonder, is that really healthy, or do we need to get back to, maybe doing a little bit of backbreaking work and maybe not worrying so much about what is going on in our heads? I think that it's a luxury that we have, that we can kind of worry about these things, and we can seek counseling, and we can all do all of these different things. And a lot of them are really great. I spend a lot of time, kind of ruminating and reflecting on life and on things. I've always been very interested in philosophy, but at some point I think that stuff can kind of drive you insane. And maybe at some point you need to kind of, just pick up the shovel and start digging, right?
I think
I don't know.
I think you're almost there. I think you're
Mhm.
80% there with the idea, and I know exactly what caused my burnout.
Mm.
It was a lack of progress, and
Mm.
this is something that if we were to talk simpler jobs, you always make progress on a simple job. If you're digging a grave, you get the grave dug. If,
Yeah, there's
any
nothing abstract about it.
no, any simple manual labor job, you get the job done. You are told to do a thing and you get it done. Simple as that. And the waters start to become muddy and murky when we start to work in digital places, in digital areas, or we start to work in design. Especially, it can be really tough to get any results for some people. And I think that's the problem for a lot of people, and it was a problem for me, that I wasn't making progress. And as human beings, we desire and require progress. We require the need to do something and get it done. And these two things, doing something and getting it done, and action, are the two things I think that when you have neither of those things causes burnout. And this is why I became so obsessed with taking action on things and just doing something. I even call my website Get Doing Things, because
Yeah.
if you can do something, no matter how small it is, and you can do it regularly, and this is why I do so many things daily, it staves off that feeling of no progress. So if I've made no progress today at work, I've been working with a difficult client or whatever, I've just had a really shitty day, I know I can come home and make progress by making an image and uploading it to Twitter and Instagram. Done. I've dug my grave for that day. I've made progress on something, and it instantly makes you feel better. As soon as you create something from beginning to end, it makes you feel better. And every time I see anybody who is struggling with something, and I get a ton of these messages as DMs on Twitter, every time people are struggling with something, it's because they are not taking action. They're thinking constantly. And you're right, there is a level of ruminating that you get to where you become obsessed with thinking about a million different possibilities. And you think, well, what if this happens? And okay, well, what if I put a strategy in place for this not to happen? And then you think, well, what happens if that happens? And before you know it, you've got this ridiculous
Yeah.
60-page strategy of something, but no action. You haven't dug a grave. You've got the most perfect strategy and plan to dig a grave that has ever been seen, but there's no grave that's been dug. And I honestly think that's where my burnout came from. And I think that's where a lot of people's anxiety and stress and feelings of no progress comes from, is that they have made no progress. It is as simple as that. We get trained to feel like we're making progress by writing a couple of tweets or making a plan or writing a business plan or all those kind of things. But in actuality, you haven't manifested something in the world. You haven't made something. You haven't created something. And I honestly think that's why journaling can feel so powerful. Writing words and putting them online, or writing a blog, writing words and putting them online, having an email newsletter, writing words, putting them online, just creating something. It doesn't have to be good. Every year where I've done a daily project, I felt better about it. the end result, it doesn't even matter. The quality of it is not even a thing. With the whole produce more thing, I'm not bothered about the resulting quality. It is purely an exercise. I called them design meditations several times. That's what it is. It's my daily grave digging.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this situation, I mean, the actual process of doing things, that becomes the end result that you felt that you were lacking before, right? When you felt this burnout and you were frustrated that you hadn't made progress. But really, I it sounds to me that what you've done is kind of reframed what it is that you do, so that you're not focused as much on quantitative measures of, you know, money or how many clients you served, things like that, but just you are looking at, you know, how many feet of, you know, ditch have you uh, have you dug this year, right?
It's a
And
really
you're not
morbid
as worried
analogy,
about,
isn't it?
you know, what purpose does that ditch serve.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
we're stuck on this grave digging. It's a beautiful
Yeah,
one.
we're really we're really stretching the analogy.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm
Yeah.
I'm focused. I'm focused on doing something no matter what it is,
Mm.
and that's what brings most joy to my life. I've never been like you. I've never been that obsessed about money. I've never had any desire to become, a multi-billionaire or anything like that. Just have enough, and I've already got enough. So that's never been a driver for me. But my mental health is a big driver. My health in general is a big driver, and your mental health and your physical health both play off each other as well. So they became a bigger driver for me after figuring out what went wrong twice. I never really want to be in the same situation again. And I think this year, despite everything that's gone around me, everything that's gone around everybody, it's one of the best years that I've ever had, both personally and professionally, and mentally, and the way that I've felt, because I've given myself up to the process finally.
Mm.
And even though I've done all these kind of projects in the past, it only really feels like this year that I've kind of finally figured it out, that putting something, I don't really know what it is, but putting something online and publishing it and having it there for the potential for somebody to see, even though in likelihood most people won't see it because it's not a hugely popular project, just the fact that it is online and it's potentially out there for somebody to see makes you feel like you've dug a grave. It makes you
Yeah.
feel like you've made something from beginning to end, rather than it just sitting on your computer. And when people talk to me about that kind of feeling, often it is the fact that they've made something and never published it because they might be scared of what people think, that makes people doubly anxious. They're anxious on what people will think, and then they are also anxious that they've made no progress. And the result is so simple, it hurts. Just hit publish. But it's so hard for so many people to do. So hard.
Yeah, and I think one of the big obstacles for me in the past in terms of self-promotion, which was one of the other things that we were going to talk about today,
Yeah.
it has been this kind of, I don't know if it's because I'm introverted or if it's because I lack self-confidence, which I don't think is the case, but I have always felt this very strong resistance to self-promotion. Maybe it's the Swedish culture that I grew up in, that you're really not supposed to, elevate yourself. Um, you're supposed to downplay what it is that you've done, and you're not really supposed to even mention it. But I think, and based on many conversations that I've had with people from all over the world, I think that this is a fairly kind of universal hang up, that there is this like sense of resistance to tweeting or to posting, one of your designs or doing these things because, well, let's be honest, like how many people do really care about what it is that you've been up to, right? It's probably not that many, and particularly not when you're starting out or when you haven't been posting things. I think ironically, there's this kind of self-perpetuating feedback loop of the more that you post, the more people will care, right?
Yeah.
But getting to that point is very difficult and can oftentimes be very discouraging, because once you do kind of muster enough bravery or whatever it may be, and you hit publish, and then it's just crickets, right? No one even has looked at what you've done. No one has clicked on it, and you can see the analytics, and it's just, wow, great. I did all of this work and no one is going to reward me for it. No one is going to validate, my feelings. And that's like that's very tough. And I think, at least for me, and I know for a lot of other people too, you'd rather just not post at all at that point, right? Unless you're sure that people are actually going to care and that people are actually going to like it. Might as well, save yourself the indignity of of having like this post of all of this work that you've done or this idea that you thought was really smart, and it's just like 0 likes, 0 retweets, 0 replies, and wow, I'm just gonna go, I don't know,
You've
lie down in that ditch
that you've dug.
Yeah.
Self-promotion, man. I'm the same, because British culture is very similar to the Swedish culture. We don't brag about what we do.
Yeah.
We're very self-deprecating. It isn't, to take a horrible British phrase, it isn't cricket to be like this. Most British people aren't people who shout from the rooftops about who they are.
Yeah.
So we both come from the same cut. But the biggest thing about self-promotion, simplest way to explain this is I tweeted this the other day. I've tweeted 37,000 times and 27 of those tweets have taken off. So self-promotion isn't a one-time thing. And the things that you think are going to be successful, the things that you think people are going to like, never works out like that in my experience. It just seems to be that the universe decides what's going to be popular and successful. And you either choose to make more of that thing, and then you eventually become successful and become known for the thing that took off, or you're a little bit of a contrarian like me and you think, I don't want to make more of that, I'm going to make this other thing, and you never really get potentially to the level that you could probably achieve. So self-promotion is a massive, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost, you've got to beat yourself up every single day. Self-promotion is beating yourself up every single day, knowing, and you've got to understand that most people aren't going to care about what you're posting for a very, very long time. I've been posting the Produce More things since May, and I've got 1,500 followers. It's not really that many. I'm chuffed with it. I'm pleased that 1,500 people are interested.
It's not bad
in that project, but for a long time, I had maybe, I don't know, 200 followers or 100 followers or something, and it's such a hard time at the beginning when nobody's caring about what you're saying, and it's even harder. And I had to get over this for me. Even harder when you know that the content you are making is better than some people who might have 20,000 or 30,000 followers on Twitter. In your heart is better. And if only you could take over their Twitter account, you'd know it'd do better.
Yeah.
But you're 30,000 followers behind them. So that's, again, quite, it feels quite bad to be in that position. And the only thing to do, and I've only realized it this year, because it's only this year I've started trying with Twitter for the first time ever. All you've got to do is just keep hammering.
Right.
You've just got to keep going. And everybody, and I've seen friends who have taken off on Twitter specifically way faster than I have, and I'm really thankful that they've took off. It's amazing to see. And the only thing I can see is that everybody takes off at their own level in terms of self-promotion, not just Twitter. Everybody takes off at their own level, and somebody at some point takes off. And it might be in 2 months, it might be in 2 years, but 95% of people don't stick around long enough to take off. They give up because they can't take the fact that nobody cares. Nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
And then they just stop, which is sad, So self-promotion for me is really new. And it's only this year I've gone into production overdrive, just trying to make anything. The only thing I've had for a really long time is the podcast. That's not hugely successful by any means. Each episode might get 50 downloads or something. It isn't massively successful. So you've kind of just got to stick at it. And I think that's the hardest thing for everybody to do. Just keep going when you're not getting the feedback, because you see these people who take off so quickly and you think, well, my content's better than theirs, so I'll just take off better than them. It doesn't work like that. The universe doesn't allow that.
Right. I guess it really is about being tenacious. I also think, though, and it's interesting that you ended on on that note, because obviously this is something that I've struggled to come to terms with, and it's something that I've kind of realized and fully internalized only fairly recently, is that the smartest people are not the ones that have the most success. And it's oftentimes being fairly smart or intelligent oftentimes works against you, right? Because most people are not they're not operating at your level. And when you are, far, on the right side of the bell curve in terms of IQ and things of that nature, it becomes difficult to sort of lower yourself. And this sounds really bad, but it becomes difficult to lower yourself to the level of, what is going to appeal to the most amount of people, right?
And I had don't want to use the cheap tactics that work.
Exactly, because you feel like you're above them. And one of the perks of working with Ed Lattimore and having him as one of my clients is, I have access to his different products about how to be successful on Twitter, and he breaks down different tweets of his. And so I kind of went through some of those courses of his earlier this year, and then I started a Twitter account in Swedish.
Yeah.
Just kind of commenting on current events and politics and society, things of that nature, right? And I was determined to treat this as like an experiment, as a game, right? Because that's one of the things that Ed talks about in one of his courses, is really like Twitter is a game and you have to play it, right? And you have to know how to play it. And it's not just about, the best content or the best ideas win. You have to play to the algorithm. You have to play to people's emotions. And you have to always keep that in mind. And you have to be, polarizing, even when you might, not want to be, because polarizing content does better than nuanced and non-polarizing content.
Yeah.
And so I applied these different principles, and it was really successful. I mean, Sweden is a very small country, and most people, of course, do not use Twitter. And despite that, I think I got this 750, 800 followers in, I think, 2 months. And, several tweets of mine just popped off. I would say that I was averaging, my average tweet got maybe 50 likes, 15 to 20 retweets. And for anyone that's active on Twitter, like, that's really good, especially if you have a very small following. And that was easy to me because the content wasn't centered around me, right? I wasn't talking about myself too often.
Yeah.
But when it comes to using Twitter or social media in general as like a tool for self-promotion and in order to grow your business, it's very different, right? Because all of a sudden, everything that you do is about yourself or your ideas or your work, the things that you've done for other people. And it is bragging, right? And it is presumptuous to think that anyone would care about your take on whatever it might be, accounting.
Yeah.
Because there's such an extensive literature about accounting or about design. And really, what do you have to contribute to that? Sure, you might be a great designer, you might be a great accountant, but really, are you a thought leader? Probably not. At least not until you actually are one, right? And like you pointed out, that takes being tenacious. That takes tenacity, and that takes, sticking it out and suffering through being like completely ignored and and looked past for possibly years. And yeah, it really is tough.
Yeah, I think over time, I just want to two things, but the first thing I want to mention is that people do want to hear your point of view because you are you, and there's only you on this planet, and you only think the way that you do. And there is a portion of people who do want to hear the way that you think, and it's gonna be smaller than some other people, but if it's a couple of thousand people, which it could easily be, that's enough. And there is always you've seen this. I mean, just look at Ed Latimore. He's just a guy, but he's got 130 or 140,000 followers on Twitter. So there's no reason why you, just being a guy called Jon, can't do the same if you talk about the thing that you want to build an audience around over time. But yeah, it does take time. It does take time, and you do have to give yourself up to the process a little bit. And when I say give yourself up to the process, I do mean using some of the tactics that you might not want to use and being a little less nuanced and all those kind of things. And the thing that really flipped a switch in my head was tweeting 10 times a day. The first thing I just said, right, I'm going to tweet 10 times a day. Simple as that, nothing else. And the second thing when I was started to think a little bit about trying to become a character rather than me, because by definition, people are only seeing you on Twitter or wherever else as it's only a small portion of your life, and it needs to be slightly elevated from what you normally are. So anything that you do needs to be a bit more extreme, and that's a little bit of the game that you've got to play as well. You have to be in a little bit of a character and almost a little bit memeable. You're developing your own personality into a meme, and that's why I have the conversation with so many people about, wow, you do so much stuff, because I make it look like I do so much stuff. And
right.
And it's one of the only things I ever talk about discipline and getting things done and blah, 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 blah. So you do become known for things like that. And the way that you get around only, and this is where the wider self-promotion comes in, the way that you only get around becoming known for one thing is by having multiple things. So a podcast potentially where you can talk nuance with people, just like we've been doing for the last hour. Twitter isn't the place for nuance. You've just got to give yourself up to the process. But it is hard, and it's still hard for me because I am in marketing just like you, and I know all the tricks, tips, and hacks, and I know I could build an account up tomorrow if I did all of those things, but I don't want to because I want to be true to myself. So by necessity, I grow slower than everybody else that I'm surrounded by, but I'm cool with that, you know? As long as you're okay with that, then that's fine. But if you want to build a big audience up and you're not willing to use the tactics, well, then it's your fault, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a bit because there were a couple of things there that, I think are probably true, but I think, out of the 50 or so people that are listening to this episode, some of them might have some of these objections, right? So first of all, you said that, a certain amount of people do care about what you have to say. And because you're only, you're one of a kind, right? You're unique and no one else thinks exactly like you do.
Yeah.
But I'm not, to a certain extent and in a certain sense, that is true. But at the same time, and I had this conversation with one of my clients the other day, and he referred to it as internal versus external frame of reference. And it's something that I've thought about this a lot over the past years, is that most people, they don't truly have knowledge. They don't truly know things. They just kind of repeat what they've heard or seen or read, and they don't truly like synthesize it or integrate it into like a holistic worldview, right? They merely learn like what the different buzzwords are and what things you can say to get approval or to sound smart, and then they say those things. And I think that that is true for like the majority of people. Is, yeah, you might have read like 10 different design books and you might know all of these different concepts that have been taught by, whoever. um, but are you truly offering something new, something that people couldn't get from reading, a book by Debbie Millman or one of these types, right? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, you mentioned Ed Lattimore as, someone who has, well over 100,000 followers on Twitter, has been very successful online and has, like a multi-six-figure business, pretty much personal income just from being himself on the internet. And if he can do it, then anyone else can. But I think the difference, and something that I've kind of grown aware of as, my work with Ed has generated a certain amount of, street cred, let's say, and other people wanting to grow personal brands have contacted me, and I've talked to them and I've heard their stories. And I think what makes Ed different and what his X factor is that he truly has a unique life story, right? Like, he grew up dirt poor in the hood. He became first an amateur boxer and then a professional heavyweight boxer, signed to Jay-Z's, Rock Nation Sports. And then, he suffered through this period of alcoholism, very rough. And then he made this tremendous comeback in his late 20s and early 30s, where he got a physics degree. He served in the military. He did all of these amazing things, and everything that he applies himself himself towards, be it, competitive chess, be it boxing, be it, language acquisition. I mean, he truly excels at all of those things. And I think that is something that only a very small number of people can claim about themselves, right? Most people, by definition, have quite average lives and, are not going to be very interesting to people or inspirational or what have you.
True. But everybody's got something that they do in a way that they do it that's different to everybody else. And I honestly believe, and I've spoken to a lot of people, not just on the podcast, but on other podcasts that I've done before. Everybody's got a story if you're willing to listen to them. And I know it sounds twee to say that and a little bit Disneyland, but
yeah, just a little bit.
It is true. Everybody has something to say, but it's finding the thing to say. If I was to share design advice and you was to share exactly the same design advice, it just hit different because I'm coming at it from my life experience and you're coming at it from your life experience. And as we've discussed on this, there's lots of different ways that we think about things. And I come at it from doing something over and over and over until you eventually get good at it. And you come at it from an efficiency point of view and doing as little as possible. And neither of those things are a bad thing. They're both different perspectives. And I think if you do share your perspective on things and the way that you think and the way that you live your life, I do think you can build up a decent portfolio of interest. A couple of thousand people, maybe even more than that. But I think that's why, to some extent, I've had a little bit of success on Twitter because I do talk about the things that I've done, and I walk the walk as well as talk the talk. I say a lot of the same things that a lot of other people say, but I also do it. I'm saying it and I'm doing it. And I think if you build a portfolio of interest up and self-promotion, and if you build your self-promotion up around the things that you know exclusively and that you've experienced in your life, you will eventually get success from it. But if you are just, like you said, following what other people are doing and not presenting that, then yeah, it does come off as a little bit fake. I think it's Ed Latimer who I've seen tweet it before, to be interesting, to get people interested, you've got to be interesting. You've got to be doing something. Yeah. You have to have something to say or some life experience to actually make people sit up and listen. And then I think anybody can build something around that. But what makes the internet so exciting is that you can start building something to build the experience and then center all your self-promotion on the things that you've learned on building the thing that you're doing to build experience on. You can build up self-referential promotion like that, and that's what makes the internet so exciting. There's lots of ways that you can do something and then make content from it, and there's definitely ways anybody can make something out of something, as long as you're kind of true to yourself to some extent, which I think is the hardest thing for a lot of people to do.
Yeah, and if you want to succeed online, I think it becomes even more difficult because, like you kind of touched upon earlier, Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of these different social media, they really don't want you to be true to yourself, right? That's not how you succeed on social media. That's how you, that's how you end up with 20,000 tweets and like 100 followers.
Yeah, like me, 37,000 tweets and 2,000 followers.
Well, that's not too bad. I think a lot of people have it way worse. But, really, like, social media favors people that know how to play the game and are willing to kind of, compromise on their own integrity or exaggerate certain parts of themselves, or do these different things that will attract more people to want to follow them. And I think this is particularly pernicious in the sort of online business industry, let's say, right? Where you do have a lot of quote unquote gurus who really are just kind of fabricating their own accomplishments, right? They might start out, as decent accounts, right? Where they're just kind of documenting what they're doing. And then they slowly begin to realize that, hey, if I just like grew a huge social media following, then my earnings potential would be a lot higher than if I'm doing this other thing that I'm currently like writing about or documenting on social media. And so a lot of them will quickly pivot towards just fake content, not being true to themselves, outright lying most of the time to their audience. And you can be very successful doing that, right? The question is, and this kind of ties back into our discussion about burnout, is, at some point, you're going to have to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, what am I doing here? What is the purpose of all of this? And am I actually like being true to myself, and am I actually accomplishing something of substance? And I think that's one of the traps of social media, is that you're kind of encouraged to fabricate things rather than actually substantiate them, right?
Yeah.
Where you should be doing work, you should be working hard in order to achieve real things, real milestones, right? But it's a lot easier, it's a lot faster to just pretend that you have reached all of those milestones, and you still get the same like dopamine kick from all of the validation that you receive on social media. So I'm not quite sure where where I was going with that, but that's just kind of a side note, I suppose.
I think the point that you're trying to make is that you you can make a very successful social media following by faking it, and that's true. But you can also make a very successful social media following by using the same tactics that the fakers use for good for yourself. And there's just a thing that you've got to get over. For me, this year it's helped hanging around with a bunch of Americans who have no fear about any of this stuff and find my whole attitude to any of it ridiculous. So that's helped me a lot. I think there's just a level where you've got to get over yourself with it. And there's still certain things that bother me a little bit. There's still things I won't do. I still won't go right down the other end of using hashtags and all that kind of thing. And on Instagram, I won't use hashtags. And starting using Hype Fury was a big change for me, because I contemplated that for a long time as well. And the only reason I did it is because somebody who I know, another developer who lives near me, called Tom Hurst, had started to build a big following on Twitter. And I was like, well, if he's doing it and he lives near me and he does very similar things to me, there's no reason why I can't do it. And even then, when I made that switch, I still found it very difficult to promote myself. And I still don't like promoting things that I've written. And I still don't like selling things on Twitter and things like that. I'm still a little bit icky about that kind of stuff. But it's all a process. And I think you've just got to keep trying to just push it just a little bit more. It is an internal thing to get over. I think it is a fear of promoting yourself and a fear of coming off as fake, I think. And I think if you've got that fear of coming off as fake, you won't come off as fake because you're aware of it.
Well, it's not even so much a fear as it's just like a lack of motivation to say these things and to do these things, right? There's just like no, like speaking for myself now, obviously, but there's just not a single bone in my body that is telling me to like, oh, you should, make everybody aware of how, clever you are, or how much you know about this one thing. I'm completely content to to keep all of that to myself and just go about my day, because it does take brain power to like, figure out like how to phrase this tweet and how to do this thing and what exactly should I say here.
Yeah.
That takes brain power, and I just, at least for myself, and maybe others are driven by fear, or maybe others are driven by the same kind of just lack of motivation, but I just, it takes so much out of me to just sit down and think like, okay, now I am going to self promote, and that thought doesn't really cross my mind. But yeah, I do wish I were American though. That would have, man.
I think what you've got to do is find an honest way of doing it.
Yeah.
You've got to find the thing that doesn't feel icky for you. And that might be, you're pretty good at talking on podcasts. It might be a podcast. Or you find a way to promote yourself that isn't promotion, that doesn't feel like promotion. That's the way I spend most of my time. I do other things that I promote back to my Twitter account that doesn't feel like promotion, but does show my capabilities in something else. Or we might have just launched a new website, and I'll link to the case study on the Genius Division website on my Twitter, or whatever. It isn't a big deal. I just link to it, and then if somebody notices it, they're like, oh yeah, I did that too. So I don't make a big deal of it. I know other people look at it in different ways, but that's the way I approach it. That I just do other things that give me an ability to promote myself in a backwards way that doesn't look like I'm just promoting myself. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Don't you wish you were American though? Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, they're about to be dealing with a lot of things, so let's see where that goes. And on that note, I saw your thing that you put up. Your
yeah, I was wondering if that was going to come up.
We've spoke for an hour and 20, probably an hour and 25, which is amazing.
Wow.
I've enjoyed every second of it. Issy asked a question. We haven't got around to it, so I'm gonna tweet you it, and we'll answer it on Twitter, and I'll make I post it in the YouTube comments, and she can see the answer.
Cool.
Cheers, man, and we'll speak again soon.
All right. You take care, Craig.